Detective Michael Carter had spent 15 years on the force, serving the streets of New York City with unwavering dedication. He was respected by his colleagues, feared by criminals, and deeply admired by his community. But above all, he was known for his unbreakable bond with his canine partner Rex. Rex, a highly trained German shepherd, had been by his side for nearly a decade, a loyal companion who had saved his life more times than he could count. Together, they had taken down some of the city's most dangerous criminals, including a powerful drug kingpin, Victor Romano. But all of that seemed to mean nothing now. In a shocking turn of events, Michael found himself in the back seat of a patrol car, wrists bound in steel handcuffs, accused of a crime he didn't commit. His fellow officers, men and women he had trusted for years, now looked at him with suspicion, some even with quiet satisfaction. It was a betrayal so deep that he could hardly comprehend it. The charge was serious, evidence tampering in a high-profile case. The prosecution claimed that the key evidence against Victor Romano, including surveillance footage, financial records, and witness statements, had been mysteriously deleted. Internal Affairs insisted they had proof that Michael had accessed the system just hours before the data vanished. But he knew the truth. Someone had set him up. Someone inside the force wanted him gone, and they had succeeded. Michael barely had time to react before he was thrown into holding, awaiting trial. His badge had been ripped from his chest, his firearm confiscated. Everything he had worked for, his entire career, had been shattered in an instant. The worst part? His only family, his loyal canine partner Rex, was being reassigned to another officer. Michael could deal with losing his job, even losing his freedom for a time, but the thought of never seeing Rex again crushed him. As he sat in the holding cell, his mind raced. Who could have done this? Who inside the department wanted him out badly enough to fabricate evidence? He knew Romano had powerful connections, but could he really reach inside the NYPD? And if so, who was pulling the strings? After what felt like an eternity, Michael was escorted out of the precinct, heading toward the transport vehicle that would take him to Rikers Island. But as he stepped through the hallway, his heart clenched when he saw Rex in his holding kennel, staring at him through the metal bars. The German shepherd whined softly, his ears flat against his head. He knew something was wrong. Michael turned to Captain Reynolds, his former mentor, now the man in charge of his arrest. "Please," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Let me say goodbye to him." Reynolds hesitated. He had trained Michael, guided him through the toughest years of his career. Part of him still believed in the man standing before him, but the evidence was damning. Still, something inside him wavered. He let out a long sigh before nodding. 5 minutes, Carter. That's all you get. Michael was led to the K-9 units area, where Rex was being kept. As soon as they approached the cage, something felt off. Rex wasn't barking or whining like he usually did when he sensed Michael nearby. Instead, he was staring intensely at the two officers holding him, his ears perked up, body tense. Michael's gut twisted. Rex was trained to detect threats, and right now he was signaling danger. As Michael knelt in front of the cage, his eyes met Rex's, and in that moment he knew something was very wrong. Rex's body was rigid, his gaze locked onto one of the officers. Then, before anyone could react, Rex lunged, snarling at the officer on the right, knocking him to the ground. A small metallic object tumbled from the officer's pocket, skidding across the floor. Michael's breath caught as he recognized it. Flash drive. And suddenly, everything changed. The room fell into stunned silence. The fallen officer, Officer Jameson, scrambled backward, eyes wide with panic as the small flash drive glinted under the harsh fluorescent lighting. Michael's heart pounded as he locked eyes with his canine partner Rex, who stood protectively in front of him, growling lowly at Jameson. Captain Reynolds was the first to break the silence. "What the hell is that?" he demanded, gesturing toward the flash drive. Jameson hesitated, his face pale, before reaching for it, but Michael acted first. With his hands still cuffed, he used his foot to slide the device toward Reynolds, his instincts screaming that this was the key to everything. Reynolds picked it up, turning it over in his palm. His jaw tightened as he glanced at Jameson. "Explain." Jameson's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but there was none. "It's nothing," he stammered. Just personal files. Michael scoffed. Personal files? Rex doesn't attack unless he senses something's off. Open it, Reynolds. For a brief moment, the captain hesitated. He had known Michael for years, but the evidence against him had been overwhelming. Still, something about this situation didn't sit right. With a heavy sigh, he motioned to another officer. Take Carter to the processing room. We're pausing transport. Michael was yanked to his feet and let out of the K-9 unit, but as he passed Rex, he gave him a quick nod. Good boy, he whispered, before being pushed forward. Reynolds, now suspicious, took the flash drive and plugged it into a computer. What he saw on the screen made his blood run cold. The files weren't personal. They were surveillance recordings, unedited, unaltered, and damning. They showed a shadowy figure accessing the NYPD's secure database and erasing the evidence against Victor Romano. But the figure wasn't Michael. It was Jameson. The video timestamps matched the exact moment Michael had allegedly committed the crime. Jameson had used Michael's credentials to frame him, ensuring that all the blame would land on the detective. Reynolds felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just a setup. This was a betrayal of justice, of the very institution they had sworn to protect. He turned to the other officers in the room. Get Jameson into an interrogation room. No. Jameson's face turned ghostly white. You don't understand, he stammered. You don't know what Romano is capable of. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. Oh, we're about to find out. Meanwhile, Michael was sitting in the processing room, waiting for what he thought would be his official transfer to Rikers. The cold metal bench pressed against his back, and his wrists ached from the tight cuffs. He had resigned himself to the worst, until the door burst open. Reynolds walked in, his expression unreadable, followed by two officers who quickly removed Michael's cuffs. Michael rubbed his sore wrists, blinking in confusion. What? You were set up, Reynolds admitted, his voice low but firm. We have evidence. Real evidence. For the first time since his arrest, Michael felt a flicker of hope. Then let me take Romano down. Reynolds exhaled slowly, crossing his arms. Jameson is already in custody, but we need more. Romano has his hands deep in the department, and if we make one wrong move, he'll disappear before we can take him in. Michael stood, rolling his shoulders. He had been framed, betrayed by someone inside his own department, but now he had a shot at redemption. And he wasn't about to waste it. Then let's do this right, he said, his voice steely with determination. But first, I want Rex back. Reynolds allowed himself a small smirk. Already taken care of. At that moment, the door opened and Rex trotted in, his tail wagging slightly as he nudged Michael's hand. Michael knelt, pressing his forehead against Rex's. We're not done yet, buddy. Because now it wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about taking down the entire corrupt network that had put him in this position in the first place. And Michael Carter was ready for war. The tension in the air was thick as Michael Carter sat in a dimly lit surveillance van, monitoring the live feed from a hidden camera. The screen flickered with grainy security footage, showing Victor Romano, the crime boss responsible for the corruption that had tainted the NYPD, seated comfortably in his luxurious penthouse. Across from him sat an anxious Jameson, his hands trembling as he tried to explain himself. Listen, Romano, Jameson stammered, wiping the sweat off his brow. I didn't know Carter would get this far. He was supposed to be locked away by now. Romano leaned back in his leather chair, swirling a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand. You assured me he was taken care of. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable threat lurking beneath his words. Jameson swallowed hard. Before he could finish, the door burst open and Michael Carter walked in, his badge shining under the dim chandelier lights. The room went silent. Romano's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly masked his shock with a smirk. Detective Carter, he drawled, setting his whiskey down. I must say, you're persistent. Michael held up a USB drive. The NYPD has everything, Romano. Surveillance footage, wire transfers, even your own men flipping on you. Jameson's face drained of color. What? Michael turned to him, his voice laced with contempt. You really thought you could frame me and get away with it? He tossed the USB onto the desk. This is the end of the road. Romano chuckled, slow clapping as he stood. You think a little evidence is going to bring me down? You should know better, detective. The system is rigged. People like me don't go to prison. Michael tilted his head. That's funny, because I made sure this evidence went straight to the FBI. Romano's smirk faltered. Michael continued, stepping closer. Right now, your offshore accounts are frozen. Your men, half of them are already in custody. The rest, they're running scared. The crime boss's confidence wavered, but he wasn't going down without a fight. He reached under his desk, but before his fingers could wrap around the pistol hidden there, a sharp bark filled the room. Rex. The canine lunged forward, knocking Romano off balance before he could even aim. The gun skidded across the marble floor as officers stormed into the room, weapons drawn. Victor Romano, you are under arrest, Captain Reynolds announced, stepping forward as two officers restrained the now furious crime lord. Jameson made a break for the door, but Michael was faster. He grabbed the corrupt officer by the collar and slammed him against the wall. You almost ruined my life, he hissed. And for what? A payout. Jameson stammered, eyes darting around for an escape. Michael tightened his grip. You're done. As officers cuffed Jameson and dragged him away alongside Romano, Michael exhaled, running a hand through his hair. The weight that had been crushing him for weeks was finally lifting. Reynolds approached, clapping a hand on Michael's shoulder. Hell of a takedown, Carter. Michael smirked. Couldn't have done it without Rex. At his name, the loyal K9 wagged his tail, looking up at Michael with bright, proud eyes. Come on, partner, Michael said, kneeling to scratch behind Rex's ears. Let's go home. As he stepped out of the penthouse, the New York City skyline stretched before him. He had been falsely accused, betrayed, and nearly lost everything, but now justice had been served. And as long as he and Rex were together, nothing would ever take them down. The early morning light bathed New York City in a golden hue as Michael Carter stood on the rooftop of his apartment building, sipping a cup of black coffee. The air was crisp, carrying the distant hum of car horns and the soft murmurs of a city just beginning to wake. It had been 3 weeks since the takedown of Victor Romano and the arrest of Jameson, but the weight of it all still lingered. Rex sat beside him, his ears perked up as he observed the world below. The canine had become more than just a partner. He was family. Together, they had survived betrayal, corruption, and a system that had tried to chew them up and spit them out. But they had won. Michael exhaled, taking a slow sip of his coffee. Romano's empire had crumbled, and with his offshore accounts frozen and key associates testifying against him, he was facing a lifetime in prison. Jameson, on the other hand, had struck a deal. His testimony had secured Romano's conviction, but didn't save him from serving a lengthy sentence of his own. Despite everything, Michael felt a sense of closure. But the world wasn't done with him just yet. His phone buzzed. Captain Reynolds, come in when you can. We need to talk. Michael raised an eyebrow, glancing at Rex. Looks like we're not done yet, buddy. Rex wagged his tail. By the time Michael arrived at the precinct, the energy in the building was different. People who once doubted him now nodded in respect. Some even clapped him on the back as he passed. He wasn't just another detective anymore. He was the man who had taken down one of the biggest crime lords in New York. Inside Reynolds' office, the captain was already waiting, a file in front of him. Michael shut the door behind him. You wanted to see me? Reynolds gestured for him to sit. You've been through hell, Carter. You didn't just clear your name. You exposed one of the biggest corruption scandals this city has seen in years. He pushed the file forward. The FBI wants you. Michael frowned. For what? Task force. Organized crime. They want someone who doesn't just follow orders but fights for the truth. Reynolds leaned back. I told him you needed time. But if you're ready, this could be your next step. Michael flipped open the file, scanning the details. It was tempting. A new challenge. A new fight. But then his eyes flicked to Rex, who was lying on the floor beside his chair, resting but alert. He smiled. I'll think about it. Reynolds smirked. Take your time. You've earned it. As Michael walked out of the precinct, He felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace. He had been falsely accused, betrayed, and nearly broken, but in the end, he'd emerged stronger. And no matter what came next, he knew one thing for sure. He and Rex would always be ready. Then,